I see thy form, O lovely mild Jerusalem, winged with 6 wings, in the capacious bosom of the sleeper, lovely threefold, in head and heart and reigns, 3 universes of love and beauty. Thy forehead bright, with gates of pearl, reflect eternity. Beneath thy azure wings of feathery down, ribbed, delicate, and clothed with feathered gold, and azure and purple, from thy white shoulders, shadowing purity and holiness, feathered with soft crimson of the ruby, bright as fire, spreading into azure wings, which like a canopy bends over thy immortal head, and in which eternity dwells.
So hello, and welcome to tonight's session of Saj Yoga. That music was Mike Westbrook's setting of William Blake's lines from Near the End of Jerusalem, his great prophetic poem, I See Thy Form, with Phil Minton on vocals. So tonight, I wanted the theme to be about England again. I'm always thinking about England and our role as the heart, and how we should be working, and the obstructions we face in trying to function properly as Saj Yogi is expressing the heart. So a few years ago, I finally got round to reading a book I've had since I was in my 20s. This was Fitzroy MacLean's Eastern Approaches. I'll explain why I'm talking about this in a minute. MacLean was a Scot born in Cairo in 1911, brought up in Italy, educated at Eton and Cambridge. His book, which was published in 1949, and which is beautifully written, is a memoir in 3 parts. The first part starts with him as a young man working as a diplomat in Paris before the Second World War. It was a very comfortable life, as you can imagine, but he was bored there. He wanted adventure. So he got himself posted to Moscow, where nobody else wanted to go, because this was in the late 30s during the Great Purge, the Great Terror, which Stalin brought about in order to consolidate his control over the Soviet state. MacLean was able to be present, in fact, at the last of the show trials of the old Bolsheviks, the trial of the 21, as it was called. And he describes this in great detail, paying particular attention to the doomed Nikolai Bukharin, the former head of the Communist International and maybe the best of the communist revolutionaries. There's one particularly chilling moment when, as MacLean says, a clumsily directed arc light dramatically revealed to attentive members of the audience the familiar features and heavy drooping moustache peering out from behind the black glass of a small window high up under the ceiling of the courtroom. In other words, Stalin was there, secretly watching his old friends and henchmen being tried, largely on the most fantastic of charges, and after they'd been tortured into confessing to their crimes. MacLean had a yearning to see those places whose names sound so romantic to the English ear: Bokhara, Tashkent, Samarkand. And he made several journeys to them, which was a very difficult thing to do at that time in the Stalinist empire. And even though he had some limited diplomatic immunity, then came the war, and he was keen to join up, but was told that this was impossible as he was a diplomat. There was one loophole, however, and that was if he went into politics. So he stood as an MP. He knew very little about politics, but he won a seat, joined the army straight afterwards, and after training was sent to Cairo, his birthplace, where he bumped into an old acquaintance, David Sterling, who invited him to join his new organization, the SAS. There then followed some exciting escapades in the North African desert and elsewhere. The last part of the book concerns MacLean's being picked by Churchill to see who best deserved Allied support in Yugoslavia. There were the royalist Chetniks, who weren't doing much to trouble the Nazis, but who in theory were much closer to British thinking. And there were Tito's communist partisans, who were causing much more damage. So MacLean was sent to join Tito, and he admired what he was doing. They were very unlikely companions, one the Eton-educated Tory MP, the other the communist guerrilla leader. Yet they remained friends well after the war. MacLean reported back to Churchill that we should support Tito. I thought it right to remind him that the partisans were communist-led, he tells us. Do you intend to make your home in Yugoslavia after the war? Churchill asked. No, I replied. Neither do I, he said. That being so, don't you think we had better leave it to the Yugoslavs to work out their own form of government? What concerns us most now is who is doing the most damage to the Germans. So MacLean rejoined Tito, and the story goes on from there. But the reason I'm mentioning this book, Eastern Approaches, is because of the mood of self-confidence that comes across from MacLean's account of his adventures. It's not a boastfulness. There's nothing bumptious about the way he describes the things he did, nor is there any false modesty. He just gives it to us straight. But there's something about this self-assurance that is so far removed from the mood of self-doubt and self-recrimination and anxiety and guilt that afflicts my country nowadays. I was really struck by it while reading the book. The heart cannot act as the heart. It cannot fulfill its spiritual function in a confident, clear-cut way when it is so anxious and conflicted. when on the one hand it's so turned in on and against itself, and when on the other it's so confused about itself, as if the brain is telling it all the time, no, don't do that, do this, or no, don't do this, do that, and so on. In other words, there are deep and growing problems here in England, in the heart. For example, it was reported this week that 500 children a day in the UK are referred to NHS mental health services for anxiety, which is the opposite of self-assurance. This means that roughly one child being here, aged 17 or under, one child is referred every 3 minutes. How many children can there be in the UK? Because at that rate, you would think that pretty soon almost every child in the country is going to be labelled as sufficiently anxious to be classed as mentally ill. Again, according to a Europe-wide 27-country survey of 15-year-olds that has just been published this last week, British teenagers are the unhappiest in Europe, with a quarter of them reporting low levels of satisfaction with their lives. Where is all this anxiety and dissatisfaction coming from? Where is our lightheartedness? Where is the self-assurance that people used to feel, or that at least they used to feel more than they feel it now? What is at the root of this epidemic of anxiety? One of the pressures, I think, is coming from that vast industry of social workers and social commentators and social engineers, including politicians, who spend their time problematizing issues in order that they can then offer solutions which always, surprise, surprise, involve having huge sums of taxpayers' money handed over to them in order to implement those solutions. And then when the solutions don't work or only make things worse, they always blame it on the fact that they are underfunded. It's noticeable that the one thing they never want to do is support the institution of the family, because what goes on in the family lies outside state control, or at least it used to, but more and more in this Orwellian society we're beginning to live in, it's coming under state control. When I was growing up, the word stress was a term mainly used in physics. Sri Mataji said the same about the word problem itself, that when she was young, it was rarely heard outside the realm of mathematics. But gradually the word stress came to be used to explain all sorts of fairly ordinary behavior. Now the word anxiety is used more often. It sounds more scientifically valid than stress. Yet by and large, these terms describe what are normal experiences of normal life, that sometimes we feel anxious and sometimes we don't. To the social engineers with their questionnaires and their hunger for funding, it's a different matter. Do you ever feel anxious, they ask, and we say, well, yes, I suppose so sometimes. And then it's, how often do you feel anxious, would you say? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxious do you feel when you feel anxious? And so on. Being anxious becomes a thing. And behind this thing is the assumption that life should be perfectly comfortable, perfectly satisfactory, and absolutely stress-free, which, of course, is an unrealistic, utopian assumption and a very pernicious one. Meanwhile, the same social engineers are busy extrapolating a climate crisis, which they then blame for children feeling anxious, and round it goes. If you are forever telling children that the world is going to get intolerably hot in their own lifetimes, is it any wonder that they start feeling anxious or depressed? The social engineers are telling children, in effect, that they don't have much of a future to look forward to. At the same time, they are painting the past of this country in as negative a light as they can. One of the things I felt when reading Maclean's book is that some at least of his confidence was born out of his country's place in the world at that time. Whether it was liked or disliked intensely perhaps, Britain was generally respected, and more to the point, the British had some respect for their own country and their own history. Reading his story gave me a sense of what it was like to live in a more secure time, because it was far more secure in a way, in spite of the fact that they were at war. And his book gave me a sense of security too, a sense of life as play. This state of affairs has changed dramatically. In the past few years, a kind of cultural jahiliya has taken place in the West and in the UK especially. Jahiliya is the Islamic idea that everything preceding Muhammad was an age of ignorance from which there was nothing to learn. It was one of the ideas behind the Taliban's notorious destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan, those two huge statues of Buddha in Afghanistan back in 2001. Over here, this Jahiliya is seen in the view, which is one that has been pretty much established across all the institutions of education, museums, libraries, art galleries, the theatre, the BBC, of course, and in popular culture generally, that before the advent of DEI, that is this cult of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, our national history was nothing but a dark tale of slavery, colonialism, racism, and the oppression of the working class, of women, of LGBTQ groups, of other races, and so on. It is an extremely simplistic, guilt-inducing, one-dimensional, ideological view of the past. Of course, there is some truth in it. But if you only see things in a one-sided way, the vision becomes a very false one. What is behind this Jahiliya? Its main purposes would seem to be, on the one hand, to big up those enlightened people, the anointed ones, our saviors who are promoting DEI, and on the other hand, to demoralize the seekers whose role it is to usher in the real evolution, this new Sahaj age. And I must say that in this, these DEI ideologues have done a great job. Under their influence, neither do children have a future worth looking forward to, nor do they have a past worth remembering. Of course, the social engineers themselves explain this epidemic of anxiety among children in terms mostly of material factors. The climate is heating up, meaning that there is so much to be anxious about. And also, there are so many people who are poor and disadvantaged and vulnerable and so on. Therefore, what with one thing or another, is it any wonder that children suffer? This is the view of people like the actress Emma Thompson, who jetted into London a while back to take part in a climate change protest, and who, while she was here, gave anyone who was listening a lecture about how between 20 and 30% of British children were suffering Dickensian levels of child poverty. This conjures up an impression of skinny children with distended stomachs rummaging through dustbins for bits of thrown away food. But actually what is meant by poverty now is something very different indeed from the poverty of Victorian times or earlier. In any case, these economic causes do not seem to me to explain very much about young people's anxiety. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of work on this and believes that a screen-filled childhood where kids have computers and smartphones and constant access to social media has more or less rewired the brains of children, creating big problems as far as learning, resilience, identity, cooperation, and conflict resolution go. He argues that we've overprotected children in real life and underprotected them online. Rather than being grounded in the natural world, they've become grounded in cyberspace. In one way, They are lords of that cyberspace, as we all are to a certain extent when we switch on our computer. And in that cyberspace, it seems first and last that life is there at their command. It's for their entertainment, for their comfort. Inevitably, this pumps up their ego. Also, it makes them insular in a way, in that so many of their peer relationships are mediated through this on-screen world. Again, this cyber world enables them to opt out of the natural hierarchy of life in which they are children and their parents are parents and their teachers are teachers. Instead, they are the masters of the universe for as long as they're online. This process is very damaging to spontaneity, which of course is an aspect of innocence. And there is something not immediately real about cyberspace and everything that happens there. There's little of the give and take and rough and tumble that characterizes interactions in the real world, which makes these children insecure and uncomfortable when they return to actual life. But beyond all this, the fundamental problem seems to me that children are not offered anything truly meaningful. The spiritual dimension of life is almost completely lacking. At least it is in society at large. And one other point, whenever you hear these anointed social engineers talking about the problems of society, such as this business of anxiety in childhood and adolescence, they are always so serious about it. They definitely do not allow themselves to be light-hearted about it in any way, because if they were observed to be light-hearted, it would undermine their self-image as professionals who really care about the problems which they have identified and which supposedly they are busy solving. And don't you dare make a joke about people feeling anxious either. But to me, there's something fake about this one-dimensional seriousness. It's absolute humorlessness. Johann Huizinga, in his great study of play, Homo Ludens, this is a book well worth reading, says how play is just play. On the one hand, it's not serious, and yet at the same time, almost paradoxically, play absorbs the player intensely and utterly. It's a curious thing, isn't it? And it is that intense attentiveness which is lost in all this self-important professional seriousness. This playful, light-hearted, detached, and yet completely committed attitude that dissipates anxiety or turns it to good use. This is what is lost, it's what's missing today in our society. So to finish with, I want to come back to Eastern approaches and quote at length, it's quite a long passage from it. It's a quote I used in my book, The Pearl of Wisdom, in a slightly different context. So here he's describing the first of two abortive SAS raids by night on the Libyan seaport of Benghazi, then in Axis, that means it was German and Italian hands during the Second World War. Having already encountered Italian soldiers on 3 separate occasions during this raid, Maclean remarking wryly of the first of these encounters that I hadn't spoken a word of Italian for 3 years and hoped devoutly that my accent sounded convincing, and also that in the dark he would not notice, they would not notice, we were all wearing British uniforms. After this, they discovered that the inflatable boat they had brought with them for the purpose of attaching mines to the ships in the harbour will not inflate. They make the difficult journey back to their car through the wire that they've cut a hole in to fetch their backup boat and try again, but this one will not inflate either. There is nothing for it but to abandon the expedition, taking their equipment with them so that it will be possible to return again without their intentions being discovered. By the way, I think you can see from this passage why Maclean is said to have been one of the models for James Bond. So he says, this meant going back to the water's edge to retrieve the boats, a nerve-wracking trip of which we were beginning to get rather tired. This time, as I started to crawl through the hole in the wire, I suddenly found myself staring into a coal-black face. It was an Ascari from Italian Somaliland. I did not like the look of him at all. Standing over me, he grunted menacingly and pointed his bayonet at the pit of my stomach. I felt at a distinct disadvantage. It seemed a more intractable problem than we had hitherto encountered. Infusing as much irritation into my voice as I could muster, I asked this formidable blackamoor what he wanted, but he only answered, "Non parlare Italiano," and went on prodding at me with his bayonet. This gave me an opening. I've always found that in dealing with foreigners whose language one does not speak, it is best to shout. I did so now. "Non parlare Italiano," I yelled, working myself into a fury. "Non parlare Italiano, and you a caporale," and I pointed to the stripe on his sleeve. This seemed to shake him. He lowered his bayonet and looked at me dubiously. My confidence returned. Trying to give as good a representation as I could of an angry Italian officer, I continued to shout and gesticulate. It was too much for the black man. With an expression of injured dignity, he turned and walked slowly away, leaving us to continue our progress down to the water's edge. There we stuffed the boats and explosives back into our kit bags and started on our return journey, a weary and despondent little party. It was at this stage that, looking round, I noticed there were more of us than there should be. 2 sentries with rifles and fixed bayonets had appeared from somewhere and fallen in behind. These were a most unwelcome addition to the party. There was clearly no hope of shaking them off in the harbour area, and with such companions it would be fatal to try and negotiate the hole in the wire. Alternatively, to try and shoot it out with them would bring the whole place about our ears. There was only one hope, and that was to try somehow to brazen it out. Assuming as pompous a manner as my 10 days' beard and shabby appearance permitted, I headed for the main gate of the docks, followed by David, that's David Stirling, the founder of the SAS, and Corporal Cooper, and the 2 Italian sentries. At the gate, a sentry was on duty outside the guard tent. Walking straight up to him, I told him that I wished to speak to the guard commander. To my relief, he disappeared obediently into the tent and came out a minute or 2 later, followed by a sleepy-looking sergeant, hastily pulling on his trousers. For the second time that night, I introduced myself as an officer of the General Staff, thereby eliciting a slovenly salute. Next, I reminded him that he was responsible for the security of this part of the harbour. Excuse me. This he admitted sheepishly. How was it, I asked him, that I and my party had been able to wander freely about the whole area for the best part of the night without once being properly challenged or asked to produce our identity cards? He had, I added, warming to my task, been guilty of a gross dereliction of duty. Why, for all he knew, we might have been British saboteurs carrying loads of high explosive. At this, he tittered incredulously, obviously thinking I was laying it on a bit thick. Well, I said, I would let him off this time, but he had better not let me catch him napping again. What was more, I added, with a nasty look at the sentry, he had better do something about smartening up his men's appearance. Then I set off at a brisk pace through the gate, followed by David and Corporal Cooper, but not by the two Italians who had shuffled off into the shadows as soon as they saw there was trouble brewing. My words had not been without effect. As we passed him, the sentry on the gate made a stupendous effort and presented arms, almost falling over backwards in the process. So there's a sense throughout this adventure that even though lives are at stake, a kind of game is being played, and it's being done so wisely and sort of lightheartedly, so that disaster is averted. So this, I mean, for me, reading this book, as I say, it had an effect on my centre heart. It made me feel, not that I could do things like that, but I'm glad other people can, and that this, as I say, this mood of self-assurance somehow transferred itself a little to myself. So we're going to play a short, it's a very short extract, very beautiful one tonight from Srimaji's talk about the problem of lethargy in the heart from 1980. So it's about 5 minutes.
That kind of a presence, which is speciality of English also, isn't it? You go in a train, they just don't talk. I mean, they don't allow you to talk. They freeze you with silence. They can't see people laugh, smile, or joke, anything. And you don't know what to do with them. Newspaper they will read only all the way, and they will fold it and read it. But they know each and everything about you.
They called insular.
Huh? Insular. Ah, yes, insular. And is a very dangerous thing for Sahaja Yogi. The one who becomes insular is in for trouble. No thank you. Is in for trouble. Insular. You know why? Because you are left alone. You will be attacked. Be together. All these booths also know you are insular. They'll attack you. By any chance you try to become unique, they'll attack you. Even some people become, by talking too much also, they can become insular. Unique, you see, on top of everybody else. Better be with everyone is better. Be one with everyone, congenial. Take a joke from others. Others are joking with you. You should not get angry. Somebody joking with you, oh, shut up. Like that one should not do. Take a joke. Be a sport. English language has one very good quality, that they can laugh at themselves. See, all the language has found out ways and methods of how to laugh at yourself. That's something beautiful about English language. I don't think any language has so many words to express these odd situations, which are very, very embarrassing. You see. You can only brand them, and by branding them, you know where you are. You exactly know what medicine is needed for this. It is like that. It's just branding. Oh, this is it. And it's very interesting to watch these things in the society and everywhere, which is described. Even Charles Dickens, now example, at that time, he found out these things and he said it. And I mean, the description of all these things is so beautifully done in the literature that you're amazed how people had a capacity to see themselves, the society as it is, and to the characterization of people, how characters are built up, you see, and how it becomes a social problem. It's beautifully done. And that's the wisdom. That's the real wisdom of British, I tell you. I mean, you may lose it if you start getting dominated by nonsensical ideas, but otherwise that wisdom you have in it. I mean, to have a person like Shakespeare, it shows what? I mean, you are a country of great people. How can that be? There are not some, there are quite a lot of them. And you are going to be the wisest because you have the advantage of their creation. On top of you've got advantage of your creation. And then you belong to a great country like that. Imagine the whole country is getting into the mire of lethargy. Who is going to save this country? You people. So again and again, it is against lethargy, and whatever is lethargy is antichrist, is anti-God, is anti-Mataji. Try to become cheerful and blissful, happy, dignified, sensible, sweet. It's not too many things. Very few. It's only one. And I know we are going to enjoy life very much. We are going to be very happy people. Take out your tempers from your heads, first of all, the angers, you see, and to say, I got very angry, means what? Why did you get angry? To be proud of your anger and temper and your irritations. It will be very beautiful, I'm sure. You're growing up, but the growth becomes little dwarfed with these nonsensical things. So you have to protect your growth from these things, as we protect a small plant from, say, frost falling on a plant. It's like that. Frost is nothing compared to the plant, because plant is growing, but the frost can kill it. And that's how you do not make it a frost. Be cheerful. People come up and they go down. I've seen people come up and then they go down. Try to look after yourself. Now after 17 days, I'm going to come and see you, very beautifully developed. And all the time my attention is on you. I work on you all the time. And I'm much more intimate with you than with anybody else, because these people see me only for 2 days. And then they started crying. They're lost. But I see you so much, more than even Indians. Is Paul there? Paul has come?
So we'll go to the meditation now. And I have nothing to add, just that this importance of being cheerful and not being proud of anxiety. If we feel anxious, we should be able to set an example to the anxious people of this world. So, and I see whenever I read adolescents, young people describing their anxiety, there is a pride in it. And that's, self-contradictory. It's not right. So let us be cheerful. Let us be assured that we are in the heart, those of us here in England, and that we have a great task to perform. We can't be half-hearted about it. Let us go into the silence of meditation. Pretty's going to play some music. If you prefer silence, of course, you can turn the volume down. We'll carry on till about 9. So that's it for tonight. And hope you've enjoyed this meditation. And again, to feel that profound self-assurance, we have Sri Mataji behind us, and within us, and above us, supporting us in every Sahaj thing we try, experimenting, sometimes making a mess of things, but always with that sincerity that we're trying to establish in this world kingdom of God. So Jai Sri Mataji, and see you next month.